Welcome to Building Healthy Relationships, the 4 Habits podcast, helping you enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life. Here are your hosts, Dr. Andrea and Jon Taylor-Cummings, recognized authorities on the subjects of improving work relationships and cultures, as well as couple and home relationships.
Well, hello and a warm welcome to all our guests around the globe, whether it's good morning, good afternoon, good evening for you. We are delighted that you're here with us for another riveting conversation. Really looking forward to chatting with our guest, Stuart Love. Stuart, great to have you on the call with us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me along.
And we have to give you your proper introduction so that everybody will understand the caliber of person that we're speaking with and all the great stuff you're doing. So, Jon, you're going to give us a run through of Stuart's bio.
Absolutely. And in the podcast that we host, we generally talk about 3 themes, whether it's harmony at home, thriving at work, or winning at life. And I think this conversation today is definitely going to pick on that thriving at work and winning at life. Maybe the harmony at home as well, but certainly the 2 and 3. Absolutely, and you'll see why now. So Stuart Love is the Chief Executive of Westminster City Council here in the UK for our overseas audience, where he leads one of the most prominent local authorities in the UK. Previously, he headed up the City Management and Communities Department, overseeing a range of teams to deliver joined-up solutions to complex community problems, informed by improved business intelligence and underpinned by corporate values and behaviors. He is the co-chair of the Chief Executive's London Committees Tackling Racial Inequality Group, London, and a Business in the Community mentor. Stuart's focus as Chief Executive is on people and culture, with equity, diversity, and inclusion being at the core. And I'm hoping we're going to pick up a lot on that.
That's the conversation today, for sure.
So during his time as Chief Executive, the demographics of the council have changed significantly to represent the communities it serves, and representation at senior levels in the organization has improved significantly. Stuart has ensured that the council publishes all its pay gaps, not just the gender pay gap, and has used this to address the gender and ethnicity pay gaps that exist in the organization. He holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree in Business Managerial Economics from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. Stuart, right. It is an absolute delight to have you on the show. We are still looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, there's so many points in there that we want to discuss during the conversation, but I have to start by sharing with the audience what got us speaking together in the first place. And I had the pleasure of speaking with one of your young Black female professionals at City of Westminster. Just
one of the employees,
one of your employees, one of your colleagues, new in her career, and her words were, "This environment or this company, this place of work, is the first place where she has felt so included and so free to be herself." And of course, I needed to find out more. She said a lot of it was down to their CEO, Stuart Love, and I needed to have a conversation with you. So Stuart, you have been achieving what a lot of firms are still struggling to even start on, in terms of creating that space where there is equity and diversity and people genuinely feel included and able to turn up as their best selves and give the best of who they are. Tell me the story. Share with us where the passion's coming from, and then we can go into some of the initiatives that you've. But what's the background to all of this?
Thank you very much. And can I just also say that the person who you're talking about, her name's Efe. She's absolutely amazing. And it's because of people like Efe that our organization is so much better than we were sort of 6 years ago when I first came into this role.
Yeah.
So I grew up in South Africa. I grew up during apartheid. I do actually quite often get challenged by people asking why a white South African man is, standing up and talking about this and doing this. And one of my responses to that is because I have to. I am the person who is accountable and responsible and needs to be held accountable and responsible for driving the change that we need to see. my upbringing in South Africa, I started my working career as apartheid ended, and so I both saw firsthand, but also was part of the affirmative action approach in South Africa, and I have to say, one of the things that does drive me is I do carry a huge amount of guilt about my upbringing. You know, I grew up in a place where you know there was a formal structure that denied black children an education while I was growing up. Black children weren't educated. That, you know, there was segregation, there was no education, and I still find it incredibly difficult when countries like the country I live in now that sits in judgment on Africa and its leaders, when these very same countries were responsible for that denial of education, sometimes directly responsible and sometimes complicit in denying that education.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was listening to the brilliant Akala speak the other day, and he was talking about, it was in the run up to the elections. And, you know, he pointed out that it's practically 5 minutes ago that women were given the vote in this country. So, you know, in his words, calm your noise when it comes to sitting in judgment on others. And I couldn't agree with that more. So I immigrated here in 2002 from South Africa. My time in South Africa had been in the private sector, and I spent a short period of time in the private sector here. And if you don't mind, I will just very briefly talk about that, because for me, it was a massive eye-opener, I guess, but it was also a shock, because I came to London believing and seeing London as this utopian place, a multicultural melting pot of diversity and equality. And, you know, I watched and listened to Nelson Mandela standing in Trafalgar Square and talking about those very things. And my first job here was working for an organization that no longer exists. I will probably name it, called Phones for You, and they've sold mobile phones and those kinds of things. And they employed me to work ultimately in their head office, but they stuck me in their flagship store in Tottenham Court Road, which is central London, for those of you who don't know London. And I had just moved over. I didn't come to a job. My wife and I immigrated, came here with nothing, and just, you know, in effect started again. And so this was the first job I got. Money was running low, and I ended up resigning after 6 days. And the HR director who'd appointed me called me up and asked me why I'd resigned. And I said to her, in the 6 days I've worked for you, I've seen more racism, sexism, and religious bigotry than I saw in the last 6 years in South Africa. And I just, you know, I can't work for an organization like this. I do actually look back on that decision to resign now with a little bit of regret, because that racism, sexism in particular, and the religious bigotry were all being dished out by managers in that organization to staff. And at the time I was about 30 years old, and the staff on the shop floor were all late teens, early 20s, needed the job, diverse group of people being abused by their managers literally every single day. I would see them in tears, and I had the privilege of being able to walk away from it. They didn't. So I had that experience, and I had a lot of other experiences when I first moved here that really disabused me, unfortunately, of that view I had of London as this kind of utopian place. And you know, I think about that time in Phones for You, and what Nelson Mandela said, and I sometimes think he must be turning in his grave. And then you know, I look at what I believe happened in this country under Boris Johnson's leadership as Prime Minister, and I saw racism and sexism actually get a whole lot worse and more overt under his leadership. And there is something really important for me here about the role of leaders. And when it comes to EDI, the responsibility and accountability has to sit with the people at the top, whether that's the top of an organization or, in this case, the top of the country. It's just so important that leaders understand this is part of their job. It's not an add-on. It's not something they can dip in and out of or outsource. It is absolutely part of their job. It's why their roles exist, and they have to be held accountable and responsible for this.
100%. And it takes so much courage, but deep personal commitment to get to that point of saying, this is my job, this is why I'm here, I will be held accountable for making the change, not just talking about it. And that's hard, and it's still hard. Tell us some of the things that you've done that help you live out that courage, that can encourage others listening in to be bold enough to step up and say, I can do this too.
Thank you. I love the way you've phrased that question. Actually, it's so important. This. So I in my role in Westminster now as the chief executive, when I was going through the interview process, I was asked a very helpful question again by the politicians, which was, what would my experience in South Africa bring to this role? And I did speak about affirmative action in South Africa. I said that the UK has got a problem that I think is much more insidious, actually, and therefore.
Yes.
In a lot of ways more difficult to tackle because the sledgehammer wasn't necessarily going to work here. But what's really important is that we are the public sector. We are local government. We exist to serve our communities, to improve people's lives. And what I've been able to demonstrate in my time in this role that is by driving that change around EDI, we are improving outcomes for our communities, for our residents. Our residents are telling us that themselves, and we can see it through our surveys and other bits and pieces. But more than anything else, our communities are just happier to talk to us and to engage with us because they see an organisation that much better reflects them. And I also just want to say we have got a long way to go. I am not sitting here in any way saying we've solved the problem, we're the best, or anything like that. We haven't. We've got a long way to go. We have made significant inroads, but we have still got a long way to go to be the organisation that we need to be, and that frankly we should be.
Yeah, but with the, just to share with the audience some of the things you've achieved in those 6 years, the major turnaround in the representation of Black and minority ethnics on your board from, what was it, 5% to what's the number now, 40%?
So 30. It's so we've gone from, in terms of our senior leadership, we've gone from 5% to 32%.
32%. Most people are still struggling trying to get into the 30% club, and in 6 years you've blown through it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very impatient person, so blown through it. I would like it to happen quicker, and I'd like it to. Do you mind if I just? There's another statistic I wouldn't mind quoting because I think this is also really important. Going back 6 years, so the communities we serve in Westminster are about 45% global majority, and global majority is a word and a phrase that our staff have asked us to use in our organisation. It's that, I've always said my opinion on this doesn't really matter, but for what it's worth, I love that phrase global majority because the first time I heard it really made me stop and think.
Can you just explain that for the audience?
I love it.
I love that.
Love the sound of it. Please explain it.
So we previously used to use BAME, Black and minority ethnic, and I really struggle with the word minority because it's often used, particularly in a political environment, in quite a pejorative way. And global majority is a phrase coined by the amazing Rosemary Campbell Stevens, who we've been very fortunate to do some work with in our organisation. And basically, what it says is that globally, the majority of the world's global population is not white. I mean, it's as simple as that, really. And as I say, the first time I heard that, it really did make me stop and think.
Yes,
it's a phrase that I know attracts controversy, and but then every phrase does, and also like any phrase or term that groups separate demographics of people together, it has its challenges, which is why when we talk about publishing our ethnicity pay gaps, etc., we break it down further than just global majority. We will break it down into the separate ethnicities, and I think there's about 17 team odd that we monitor, and we can tell, where the biggest challenges for us lie, both in terms of numbers, but also the actual pay gaps themselves. What I was going to say is, 6 years ago, our organization was 32% global majority, serving communities at about 45% global majority.
Right.
We are now we're about 42% global majority as an organization. So the demographics of the organization have shifted by 10% in the last 6 years. And a big part of that was about us changing our reputation. We had a reputation as a place, particularly where if you wanted to get on in your career, we have people who work here that openly say to us, Westminster City Council was seen as the graveyard of global majority careers. So we would never have considered coming here, 6, 8, 10, 20 years ago. Now, however, we see an organization that is prepared to change, to grow, to learn, and things are changing. So we want to be here and we want to be part of that change. So I think that's really important, actually, because, the organization as a whole is now much more, it's pretty much representative of the people we serve. At senior leadership, though, as we're discussing 32%, we need to get that up to the 42, 45%.
So before you move on there, I think that's such a powerful point to make, because to change your reputation to the point where people who thought it was a dead-end job and there was no progression if you're Black, for example, they're now wanting to come and work with you. That's helping to change the experience around being inclusive in recruitment, because you don't need to go hunting for people who are, from a different ethnicity or some other aspect of diversity. They're coming to you to say, I see what you're doing, and that's a story I'd like to be a part of. That's a really big message for companies who are struggling with inclusive recruitment to understand.
I think, one of the things that used to drive me mad, and I saw my predecessors do this, and I see it and still hear it all over the place, public and private sector, is when you ask, the people at the top of organizations why they have such a problem with lack of representation, you'll get a shrugging of shoulders and, nobody ever applies for the jobs. And that's just, it's a response that is riddled with all sorts of really, for me, I do think it's riddled with racism and sexism and other things, because the question you've got to be asking yourself is why? What is stopping people applying? And what are you doing to make yourself be that inclusive and equitable employer that people see as an employer of choice? And, when I first got the job, everybody wanted to sell to me, and all the recruitment agents reached out to me. And I normally don't I ignore those kind of approaches, but with the recruitment agents, I said yes to every single one of them that wanted to meet with me. And I sat down with them and I said to them, listen, if you are recruiting for Westminster in our senior leadership tier, middle to senior management, who do you put in front of us to appoint? And the answer I got back from those who were being honest was middle class white people. That's who Westminster's known for. And going back to the 5% in ICU, that's and so I did say to them, you are now dealing with a different Westminster. And in order for us to continue to deal with you, we will not accept anything other than diverse long lists and ultimately short lists when we are going ahead with recruitment. And so one of the things that I was able to introduce into Westminster, going back 6 years now, was what we call positive action, and it is our version of the Rooney Rule. And the Rooney Rule, for your viewers and listeners in America, is an American thing, and it's comes from American football. And basically, at its heart, it requires a diverse shortlist for all of our managerial appointments, and that is something that everybody on the shortlist is there on merit. And that is something which we monitor, not just the shortlists themselves, but actually what ultimately that translates to in terms of appointments. And that is something that has helped us drive that improvement in representation in our middle and senior leadership tiers. And sorry, I know I'm saying a lot. I just want to come back to something that Dr. Andrea, you mentioned earlier, and that's the importance of data. When we were required to publish our gender pay gaps, along with all of the other organisations in the UK, we made the decision that we were going to publish our ethnicity pay gap. And at the time, we didn't know what it was. And I'd been trying to introduce the Rooney Rule here, and I'd had sort of 6 months of lawyers and HR professionals trotted out in front of me to tell me, you can't do it, it's unlawful, et cetera, et cetera. And then I saw the gender pay gap alongside the ethnicity pay gap. And at that point in time, the gender pay gap was running at about, I know there's median and mean, and I always just choose the worst because that's the one, was running at the gender pay gap was running at 13%, and the ethnicity pay gap was running at 18%. And that just tells an appalling story of the kind of people that this organization valued. Basically we valued white men over all others. And when I saw that, I did turn the air blue and say to those same HR professionals and lawyers that were in the room with me, I'm not going to take no for an answer. You now need to go away and tell me how we're going to do this, not that we can't. And from that, we came up with our positive action approach, which is perfectly lawful and is driving or partially driving some of the change that we've needed to see. But that important bit about the data there, being able to help focus the passion and the real moral driver around this, helped me certainly to be able to make some of those decisions that prior to that there had been resistance to.
But I want to camp out there just for a minute.
Exactly. Well, on the numbers, actually, just before you, maybe, I don't know if that's where you're going with this, but on the numbers, are you able to share where those gender pay gap and ethnicity pay gap numbers have gotten to from the 13 and 18%?
Yeah, this is really important. And I will also say actually quite difficult. And I'll explain why in a second. So gender pay gap now around about 4%.
From 13% to 4%.
Yeah.
Wow.
So and representation is really interesting on gender as well. So, our organization, 60% women, 40% men, and 6 years ago, senior leadership was flipped on its head, 60% men, 40% women. That senior leadership tier is now about 50-50. But at the very top of the organization, we are now 60% women, 40% men. So
the top of the organization reflects the overall organization, the 60-40, 60 women, 40% men.
Does,
awesome. And
on ethnicity, though, that's where it is more challenging for us. Ethnicity is round about 13%. But it has stubbornly stayed around about 13% for the last couple of years.
So it was 18%. It's gone down to 13%, but it's at a sticking point. Got you.
And some of the reasons for it are actually I don't want to say positive because that's the wrong word. Some of the reasons for it are, but you can explain. So when I said earlier, our organization's gone from 32% to 42% global majority. At the same time, our senior leadership has improved significantly. But the vast majority of that 10% of new starters are in the lower paid parts of our organization.
Right.
So what's absolutely critical is that we have a plan and a program in place to help ensure that 42% progresses through our organization, and ultimately the senior leadership reflects the entirety of the organization. So when I say we're not there yet, we're not.
So there are pathways to create so that those who are on low paying jobs can earn more and balance that out. Go on.
The reason why I'm going to say that this is difficult, and this is a difficult thing for me to say about an organization that, frankly, Westminster is a great place. I should probably say that because some of what I'm saying is challenging. But so I announced to the organization about a year and a half ago now that we were going to close our pay gaps completely. And I did that without involving my senior leadership team. I did it because, so it wasn't from that point of view a great example of change management or change leadership.
Getting buy-in before.
Yeah.
But we hear you.
But the reason why I did it was we'd spent 3 years of, again, people feeling very uncomfortable in the space, people not doing any of the things that they were being asked to do to help us drive the change, fiddling around the edges, and kind of hoping every year that the pay gaps would come down rather than intentionally tackling them. And I wasn't getting the traction I needed in the organization from some, not all, some of our senior leaders to affect that change. So that making that announcement gave people the kick up the backside that they probably
Had to
needed.
deliver.
Yeah. It also meant that some people left as a result. Some of the senior leaders left as a result, and I think that's something that you have to be prepared, not just to accept is going to happen, but sometimes you have to be prepared to make it happen.
Yeah.
It was described to me really helpfully by somebody. We were talking about the EDI agenda, and she said to me, "Look, Stuart, when it comes to the EDI agenda, there are people who are on the bus, there are people who are waiting to get on the bus, and then there are people who need to be pushed under the bus. And sometimes we need to be better at doing the pushing, frankly. And that difficult conversation with people about either you're on board or, there's the door, I do think we need to be better at doing that."
Yeah. But equally, sorry, you go on.
But this is such a key point, because it comes back to the leader who has both the passion and the courage to hold themselves and everybody else accountable for making real change and saying either you're with me or you're not, and being prepared to see people go. Because with the whole EDI agenda, what companies are comfortable doing is ticking boxes, talking about data when their heart's not really in it, to the point of saying this is not acceptable, no more excuses, we must make this change. How would you encourage another CEO, somebody, another leader who feels like they're the lone voice, really passionately wanting to make a difference, but everybody else is doing the dance and, moving paper around and their heart's not in it? How would you encourage them?
I think what I'd say is that they will quite quickly, if they are prepared to put themselves out there and authentically lead in the space, find that they're not a lone voice.
Right.
There are so many people in our organization who have helped me, who've lifted me up off my knees when I've needed it, and frankly, people who I should be doing that for have been doing it for me. I work with an amazing group of people, and Serena Simon is somebody who works here with us, and I've known Serena from the very outset, and Serena is one of those people who is both a huge support and help, but driving force, and also she's a huge critic of mine as well, in the nicest possible way. Serena will call it out when I get it wrong, and I do get it wrong. And I only discovered that when I stood up and said to the organization, it was one of the first things I did when I got the job. I said, we've got an enormous problem here.
Yeah.
And we need to address it. And Serena came up to me afterwards, and she is a black woman in our organization. She came up to me afterwards and said, "Okay, great, you've called it out. What are you going to do about it?" And I said to the truth is, I don't actually know. I don't have all the answers. I need your help. And from that day, Serena has just thrown herself into this. And so what I would say is that there are people out there who will absolutely step forward, help you. I think also you might be quite pleasantly surprised to find some of your senior leadership team. I'm seeing a change in this, both in the public and private sector. I don't know if it's a generational thing. I think some of it's driven in some cases by boards and their demands and all of the rest. But the fact of the matter is, I'm seeing in a really positive way, I'm seeing more and more senior leaders coming into post who understand that this is something that they've got to address, and that it is their responsibility to do something about it. And by that, I am talking about white senior leaders who understand now that this is a responsibility that they have, and not something that sits somewhere else in their organizations. It's
But my turn now.
So much that we want to
exactly. No, I'm wondering, again, going back to that number you had of the ethnicity pay gap going down from the 18 to the 13, and I'm wondering if it isn't a reflection of the friction, I guess, that it causes when you're trying to achieve this kind of a change, where you now have until people are fully on board on the bus, and even as they go on that journey, there's an sense of what's in it for me kind of thing. Am I putting myself at risk, my own career, the people around me, the people that I know and love? What are we doing? Is sort of a disenfranchisement question. I guess my question to that is, how do you manage that, or how have you been able to manage that with the senior leadership team, for them not to feel like this is threatening, this is going to threaten me and the people around me, my team? How have you been able to manage that?
There's a whole lot tied up in that, and I the truth is I can't say that I managed it brilliantly. When I made the announcements around the pay gaps, there was a really bad reaction. Some of it to my face, although that was the smallest amount. Some of it behind my back, and then some of it anonymously, with anonymous letters being written to me and the leader of the council, who's my boss, the lead politician. And when I spoke to the organisation about closing the pay gaps, I did say, I'm going to ask you all a question, but it's a rhetorical question. No answers needed. And I'm really sorry to say this to you, because it's very easy for me to sit here as a white man in my position and say what I'm about to say. But if our organisation only had a gender pay gap, would I have been having to stand up in front of the organization, make a whole big thing about we're going to close our pay gaps, and would I be getting the attacks? Would the anonymous letters be landing in my inbox and the leader's inbox? And the short answer is no. It's when you bring race into the conversation that it suddenly becomes difficult for people. And some of the reaction I saw, and I don't want to sound overdramatic. I don't believe I'm sounding overdramatic, but some of the reaction I saw was exactly what you've just described to me. I saw people suddenly seeing their piece of the pie being reduced, and being reduced to something that was purely about, it being equitable. It no more than that. And it did remind me a little bit of the end of apartheid in South Africa, where the white population went from having had everything to suddenly going, oh dear, we're going to have that much of
we're going to have to care.
yeah, exactly. And people were thinking about it not just in terms of them but their kids. So so I had a 95% chance of being in senior, and now we get to where we should be, and my kids are going to have a 40 whatever it is, 8% or 45% chance of, 55%, 58%. So yes, there was quite a lot of that reaction. The way I dealt with it, I said, wasn't always great. There were times when I got angry, and that in itself resulted in consequences for people in the organization that weren't great, because when I get angry, it's people don't take out their response on me, they take it out on other people in the organization. And so it was, and again, that's where people like Serena have been so great, because they pointed that out to me. So when people ask me the what's in it for me question, the answer is, this is your opportunity to be part of a fantastic team, an organization that is a great place to work, that people want to come to, where if you have on your CV that you were part of a team that transformed our organization into a place where our staff love being here, we are a diverse set of people and leaders who are delivering outstanding outcomes for our communities, then that's what's in it for you. And the fact is, having painted a bit of a negative picture, the fact is that the majority of our senior leaders see that, want to be part of it, and want to help affect the change.
Yeah, and usually the challenge is they don't know how. They just need somebody to have the guts to stand up and say, we're going to do it and we're going to find a way how. And that leads us on to the conversation around relationships. You mentioned Serena, but how did relationships support you in taking such a tough stand, such a public, courageous commitment to getting diversity, equity, and inclusion right? What are the relationships that supported you in that?
As you say, I've mentioned Serena, and Serena, I can't overstate how important Serena has been to me, because there have been times I'm an introvert by nature, and being authentic in this space is really important, and I've never been able to be anything other than that, but it can also be very, very for me anyway, as an introvert, I can find that quite draining, and one of the things that always springs to my mind, and there's several examples, but post George Floyd's murder, we have an all-staff session, and that was obviously while we were in the pandemic, and it's online on Teams, and I stood up and spoke to the organization about it, and I was in tears, and I being in tears in front of hundreds of people on a Teams call was really difficult. And Serena was there for me, she and Serena was being impacted by this in a way that I will never be able to understand. Yet she was still there for me, and that's what I said earlier about people being there for me when really it should have been the other way around. My relationship with my wife has been key. My wife has seen the impact that this has had on my personal relationships with my family, with people back in South Africa. It's, again, this is not an easy thing for me to say, but people, the people who I grew up with, and some parts of my family don't understand this, and they don't understand the need for change, and are quite comfortable in how they grew up and the privileges it afforded them. So my wife has been a huge support to me in all of this, and I'd say, probably those are the two key relationships.
Amazing.
The journey that you've been on, Stuart, has just been an absolutely incredible one. What's it 6 years now, 2018. Looking back on that time, though, I'm a stories guy. I don't know if there are any you can share, but are there any you can share in terms of highs and lows as you look back on that last 6 years of CEO of Westminster City Council? The journey, as you say, continues. You still got a way to go yet to achieve some of the goals that you set out to do, but just snapshot to date, any highs and lows, anything stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the highs for me is that in all of this, when I first started on the culture EDI, which from day one, that was the thing that I have led with. People very quickly started saying to me, "Oh, Stuart, you're forcing really difficult conversations on the organization," and I might come back to that if that's okay, because I think there's a really critical point in that. And so there was a lot of fear about what this would do to the organization's morale, people's engagement, what it felt like to be here. And 6 years ago, our organization was bang average in terms of our people's engagement, how it felt to be here. We were average, and Westminster is a very well-resourced place. We're an incredible location. We have, amazingly diverse communities, some of the richest and poorest parts of the country, but we're also, home to the House of Parliament, to the the grime and the glitz and the glamour of the West End and all of that. It's an amazing place, so there was no reason for us to be in that position. Moving ahead 6 years, our staff engagement scores have gone up by 12%. People are much happier. People see us as a much better place to work. The feedback that FA gave you about being able to come here and be herself, that's constant feedback that we get. So that is a real high for me, is knowing that what we've done over the last 6 years has made us a much better employer. And where we have people who are much more engaged, we're doing a much better job for our communities as a result. So I in overall terms, that's been a massive high for me.
And just to clarify that, it's all people of all ethnicities,
Yes,
not just
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah,
And that's a really key point. That's what
Mm.
you were saying to your
yeah,
senior leader. This is what is in it for you, even though you're, a white middle class man.
yeah,
You will still benefit from an environment that serves you better.
yeah,
In turning up.
Not just about the global
Yeah,
majorities.
yeah.
yeah.
And
Really
you know,
good.
that's exactly right. At the end of the day, this is about creating equity. It's
Yeah.
and in some cases only parity. You know,
Yes.
there is, and we are still not an organization where everybody would be given an equal opportunity. People often say to me, how do I become chief executive? Tell what path should I follow? And my answer to that is always don't follow my path, because I was put into this role. Westminster's never had anybody other than a white male chief executive. 60
Right.
years of existence, one of the most diverse parts of the world, white male chief executives for 60 years. And that cycle needs to be broken. It really does. I'm very conscious, and I've been pulled on this actually by another chief executive, quite rightly, and she did it very gently, but she was absolutely right. She said to me, Stuart, be very careful, because I've said from day one, I hope whoever replaces me is different to me, doesn't look like me, And she said, and this comes back to something I wanted to come back to on the difficult conversations piece. She said, Stuart, just be very careful, because if the person who replaces you is not a white man, they are going to either themselves think that the reason why they've been given the job is because they're not a white man, or others are going to think that's so.
Exactly.
So when you say that in the blunt way you are saying it, just be very careful of and that bit about difficult conversations. Whenever I talk about this, I think this is changing now, but there was always an assumption that this was a difficult conversation for white men. And again, somebody in our organization a few years ago stood up. She's a black woman, and she said, I just need to say that if the white men here think that this is a difficult conversation for them, just for a minute, put yourself in my shoes. So until Stuart turned up and started talking about, these issues of representation, lack of equality, racism, etc., I never once thought about whether or not I'd been discriminated against. But I'm now looking back at my last 8 years in the council and thinking, hang on, all those times the white person next to me was tapped on the shoulder and given a promotion, was I actually being discriminated against? And now that I've got the promotion, I'm now thinking to myself, have I got the promotion because I'm part of some sort of target that Stuart's got? So I'm a tick box rather than I've got it on merit and everything else. And, those are conversations and thoughts that I will never have to have.
Yeah.
And no other white man's ever going to have in terms of their career. And, my response to that is there's no answer to that other than, first of all, I mean, this woman's amazing, and she's gone on to a job somewhere else. Unfortunately, I desperately hope we get her back at some point. But she all I could do was ask her to continue to help us to be better, to work alongside us, and to please know that absolutely she's in the role she's in on merit.
Absolute merit.
And I do feel bad, because I sit here and talk, and this comes back to the what's a white South African male talking about, because I know I'm talking about stuff that is, I do feel it, and it drives me. I'm passionate about it, but I can never feel it in a way that people who are experiencing it every day and have lived it their entire lives will. I can't ever put myself in those people's shoes.
You might not feel it, but you are a powerful voice to help others think about what it might feel like, because you will be listened to. You won't be seen as the person just trying to bang the drum for black people or brown people or whatever. You're seeing it in a real way, and you have the evidence to show that when we get inclusion right, when we create the environment where it's about all of us, not just some of them, everybody wins. As people are struggling, companies are struggling to get 2 or 3% increase on engagement. They'd be celebrating about that. You got 12% increase, which means it's an environment where everybody can thrive, not just, even though you have to focus on bringing in more diversity and more equity for those who are different, to create the environment, everybody benefits when you get that environment right. So, I mean, there is so much more that I'd love for us to go into, but I'm conscious of time, and you've already been very generous. Is there anything that we've not touched on? Any of the initiatives that you've worked on that you wanted to mention? Any advice that you would give to these companies who maybe they're leaders there who genuinely want to do it, but they're just stuck? Just whatever's on your heart that we haven't discussed yet. Let's get it in there before we have to wrap up.
Thank you so much. I wanted to come back to that bit about leadership and responsibility and accountability. Just going back to the other question you asked, though, around initiatives, and I've talked about positive action, and positive action is part of a wider range of things we've done around inclusive recruitment. And the really important thing there, again, is making sure that as an organization, you don't do this again in a tick boxy way. So we have diverse panels, but the point about that is not just asking a global majority person to sit on a recruitment panel. That starts at the very beginning, when the jobs have been spoken about, when we recruit a recruitment agent to work with, if we're going external, that diverse panel is from the very beginning all the way through to the end. So it's really important that you take a holistic view of this, rather than do little bits and pieces in isolation of each other.
Right.
Going back to the leadership point, I still see, despite what I said earlier about the seeing improvements, I still see far too many chief executives outsourcing responsibility for EDI. I speak to people who will say, "Oh yes, I'm doing EDI. We're doing EDI really well. We've got a staff network, and that staff network is, I meet with them once a quarter, and they give." And that's not EDI. And I talk to a lot of people in cross sector. This is not just a public sector thing. Who, and some of it has come from the amazing experience I've had through the business and the community mentoring program. Those organizations that do that tend to appoint the most senior black woman, and that tends to be what they do in their organization, to chair the network. And I've spoken to people who are those network chairs, and it is so damaging to them the vast majority of the time, because they're forced into this position. They are often seen, therefore, as part of the problem by the people who then form the network, and the people who form the network are disillusioned because they're not seeing that authentic leadership from the top of the organization, and it's basically sidelined and tick boxed. And the other thing that CEOs do is they outsource it to HR. So we had a session for chief executives about a year ago now on EDI, and we'd blocked out a morning, and we'd got, this is in London, and we'd got a bunch of really good speakers to come and do some work with us. And not a single CEO turned up.
Wow.
Not one. And they sent their HR directors, heads of, and I had those people saying to me, "Where are our CEOs? Where are the people that need to hear this?" Quite rightly. And that, again, speaks to me about that problem of not being, both understanding the responsibility and accountability, but there's also really something really important about being held accountable and responsible.
Absolutely.
So the people who the CEOs are responsible to need to hold them accountable and responsible in this space. It's unfortunate that, because I'd love to say people were doing it because they understand the moral imperative here. But I've learned to my cost that not everybody sees it that way. Which again is why the question you asked around, the sort of what's in it for me, and the ability to demonstrate the improvements and outcomes for our residents is so critical from a local government public sector point of view, for us to be able to say, by doing this, we're actually doing our jobs much better for our communities. So that piece around authentic leadership from the top of the organization is critical, and ensuring, therefore, that can't just be vested in one person. I often used to get asked, I should say, not anymore, "Stuart, what happens when you leave? Then all of this falls over." And my response to that is, if that is the case, then my time as chief executive has been an abject failure. It can only ever be judged as a failure, because this has got to continue. This has got to be in the organization's DNA. It's got to be embedded. All of our senior leaders, not just me, all of our senior leaders are accountable and responsible.
Yeah.
And the last thing, I used to refer to this as being relentless, and I again, another amazing person in this space, Professor Paul Miller, spoke about it as there can be no respite when it comes to addressing this. And he is a black man who leads an organization focused on education. And there can be no respite, but that respite can't only be for global majority people and leaders. It's got to be for white leaders as well. And I don't say that from the point of view. One of the things I'm very conscious of is not ever wanting to pitch myself as the kind of, the white leader riding in on the kind of, shining horse and going, look at me. That's not ever what this can be. And I think I said this to you, Dr. Andrea, when we first spoke. I struggle with the concept of allies and allyship, because to me, the definition of an ally is somebody who can empathize, somebody who can dip in and out. And I was sent something a few years ago, which is from America. Dr. Yaya Blay, from memory is her name, and she said, the term she likes to use or would like to see is accomplice. And I do see myself as an accomplice rather than ally, because I have to have, I hate this phrase, but I have to have skin in the game. I have to be.
That's the phrase that came to mind. Yeah.
I have to be prepared to take risk. Call me up at 2:00 in the morning. I'll be there. I'm driving. No questions asked. And I do think that there needs to be an understanding that, particularly from white leaders, that we have a responsibility here to drive the change that we need to see. So that is really important to me. This is not something that is somebody else's problem. It's our problem as much as it is anybody else's problem.
Yeah.
I guess I love that. I was trying to think what the word was earlier, ally, but it just didn't seem strong enough to describe the work that you've been doing. So accomplice, I love that. But I think even going back to what you were talking about, getting people onto the bus, what I'm hearing you saying here really is the CEOs need to be driving the bus.
Yeah.
Not even getting onto the bus. They need to be driving that bus forward in EDI space to make the change happen. Stuart, this has just been so powerful.
Yeah. And I love that phrase about getting it in the organization's DNA, realizing that if we don't create the environment where we all win and that there is real diversity in the all, then everybody is going to lose. Morally, financially, in terms of performance, impact, in your case, impact on the community. Or organizations are operating substandard until we get this right. So getting it right is the imperative.
And I think that there is, sorry, I will stop now, but
don't go.
It comes back to the question you asked about other CEOs and what, where they could look for help and support. The fact is, I believe 80% of our organization is on the bus or waiting to get on the bus. So the 20%, I have a very strong and clear view on this, and I've been very outspoken on it, need to go.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in spending our time, effort, and resource on the 20% who aren't ever going to, frankly, be in this space. We should not be catering to the lowest common denominator. I'd rather spend all that time, effort, and resource on the people who actually want to be here and affect change. But the good news is, if you stand up and you demonstrate that authenticity, your organization will row in behind you. And yes, you will have the challenge from the 20% and all of the rest. But the fact of the matter is the organization will row in behind you, because 80% of your organization, Westminster is a microcosm of the rest of society. 80% of the organization will understand this is important. Maybe not how to do it, but they'll want to be part of it.
And if they have any challenges or feel like they're on their knees, call Stuart, because you will certainly be able to, from experience, lift them up and help them know why they're doing a good thing. It has been, this conversation is just outstanding. I already told a client that I'll be sharing this, that we'd be doing this podcast, and she's asked for a recording of it, because this is the thing that leaders need to have courage to grapple with and do in an authentic way to get it right so that everybody can thrive.
I was
Amazing.
going to ask, are there any resources you have that you might want to share that might help other leaders in
Like
this
the mentoring business, in the community mentoring, everybody's going to want to contact Stuart now.
Anything there, or are you happy for leaders to reach out to you? How is there anything?
I'm very happy for anybody who wants to reach out to me. I mean, Business in the Community is an organization that I've just completely forgotten the name of the woman who runs it. But again, she's an incredible force of nature in this space. So yeah, and yes, we have. I can make available, and I'll find an easy way of doing this. Maybe email you or share.
We can get some details from you, and if there's anything you're happy to share, we can put that in the show notes for people to follow up there. We can get those once we end the show. But Stuart, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time, making the time out of your busy schedule to share those real nuggets there,
and for being you're so vulnerable and you're so humble in the work that you're doing, and yet you are achieving such great things. Even calling me Dr. Andrea, I meant to say so many times, call me Andrea, but I didn't want to interrupt what you were saying. But just by modeling this humility in leadership, courage and humility, and getting the balance right, you are touching so many lives by the work that you are boldly just moving forward with in the EDI space. So we wish you well. We are cheering you on for not just City of Westminster, but for the nation and for other nations to follow suit. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you talking to me and just giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
It's been our joy. Well, to our listeners, viewers around the world, we say thank you for joining us, and see you next time. We hope you've been inspired by this. We know you've been inspired by this. Go and make action. Make sure that you're on the bus. Make sure that you're driving the bus if you're CEO of your organization.
Courage and
get
boldness.
Other people on the bus. Let's this EDI agenda move forward. There's so much we can do here to impact lives. So thank you again, Stuart.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, and you want to hear more, the best thing to do is subscribe. Then you'll never miss an episode. There's a new one every Friday. You can stay connected with us on social media at The4Habits for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and to participate in discussions related to the show. We always love to hear from you. And of course, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on your preferred platform to allow us to reach more listeners and help people around the globe radically transform the way they do relationships, so they too can enjoy better harmony at home, thrive at work, and win at life.